and he's going to today talk about the restitution of abandoned properties following the First World War, the case of Cebel-i, Bereket, Sanjak. Hello everyone. When we talk about the Envali Metrukiye, the abandoned properties law, this is what we mean. With the decision of the the deportations in 1915, a series of decrees and laws were passed, and altogether they bring about the abandoned properties law. And under this heading, first the CUP and then the Turkish government introduced certain legislations to take away properties of Armenians, Greeks, and the Syriac in quote-unquote under legal pretexts. After the Monteros agreement, the surviving Armenians started coming back to their homeland, and on a local level, we are now going to look at what actually took place, because we know that after 1918, especially the 1915 abandoned properties commissions were established through provisional laws, and then other commissions were founded in 34 different provinces. And so these are for the handling of the Armenian properties. These are the two important means in the liquidation of the Armenian properties, and in the subsequent process, with several legal decrees or legislations up until 1920, the liquidation law was annulled, and restitution began. The process of restitution began in 1920. However, the restitutions on the local level in certain provinces, whether they actually took place or not, is rather controversial. We don't have much data, because the liquidation commissions, and first the abandoned property commissions and then the liquidation commissions, had certain books, and these books, we cannot simply get hold of these books. And we know that these are in the archives, because for a long while I worked in the Ottoman archives, and for 6 months I always inquired about these records, and I was told that those records have not yet been turned into a catalog. So these documents have been seen, some people have perused them, but they have not been seen fit to be put into the category. In order to taking the properties of any group also threatens their very existence, and the taking of the properties of the Armenians actually endangered the lives of the Armenians, and actually the motivation on part of the Sunni Muslims cannot be overlooked. Turkification of the economy, creation of a national and Muslim bourgeoisie also are some of the manifestations of this process. The nature of this political and legal violence also adopted an economic perspective, and the returning of the Armenians and the restitution of their properties after the CUP government, certain legal processes were triggered. However, during the process, the Kemalist movement became stronger and stronger, and the Armenians had to leave Asia Minor again. And the restitution, albeit in a limited capacity, was actually going on, but after this it was shelved. After the First World War, on 8th of October, the government resigned. Ahmet İzzet Pasha government followed suit until 1922. This is important because there's a new legislation about abandoned properties. 11 governments served in this period, and they they actually initiated the legal proceedings against the CUP members and allowed for the returning of the exiled Armenian citizens.
Toplu geri dönmeler konusu.
Mass returnings, 18th of October 1918 is when the first step was taken. When we look at it, we see that this decision to allow for this returning to take place, all the provinces received orders, and as of December 1918, 10,000 people actually came back, and by end of December, 23,420 Armenians came back. In 4th of November 1918, the Deportation Act was annulled, and this is again a provisional legislation about returning of the Armenians. The biggest problem was that the movable and immovables, and how to restitute, how to arrange their restitution. In Tanin, it is said that these goods will be given back and their houses will be evacuated, and such orders were actually sent to the government officials who took up these residences. And in this process, about the restitution, certain arrangements and certain legislations had to be passed according to the Allied forces as well, but the central government exhibited some resistance towards this in 1920. In January, up until this date, the restitution process continued, and this was sent from the central government to the provinces through telegrams. However, and this central orders all throughout 1919 continued. In February 1919, with an order sent to all the provinces, it was said that the goods should be given back to their rightful owners. On 12th of October 1920, the CUP legislation was all annulled. Abandoned properties, about their restitution, the decree, it was published on January 12th, 1920, and this was because of the pressure of the UK and the French governments. And this decree consists of 33 articles, and it lays down rules as to how this restitution is going to take place in a detailed fashion. The most important thing about the decree is as follows. The liquidation law dating back to 1915 and bylaws published in November of the same year confiscated goods and immovables should be without delay given back, it says. 1918 decree, and the process emphasizes two important things. With October 1918, the properties were to be given back, but we don't see anywhere that a compensation had been paid for these. In 1915, the abandoned properties law in the relevant article says that the Armenians that are deported somewhere else, the goods left behind, the sales or auctioning off, the income generated should be kept in a treasury, and that it would given to them once they go to their destination. In 1916, this article was also annulled. So actually, like I said previously, these goods, their compensation had never been given to the Armenians. In 1918, in February, there's another report, and here you see that no compensation was paid for the Armenian confiscated property. Before 1920 and after the decree, like I said, there was external pressure, and especially on immovables of these Armenians, as a result of which like in the Cebel-i Bereket Sanjak in Adana province, and the Osmaniye Kaza was somewhere where this restitution took place. I I did a research in Bagos Nouvarian Library in Paris, and I based my presentation on this, and I focused on UNTAP Armenians during my PhD. I was looking for other documents, and then I came across this document by some stroke of luck. In line with the legal framework I just outlined, this is well, Ottoman Armenians started to go back, and there were so many applications about their movables and immovables. And in December 1918, with the French occupation of the region in Adana, the French governor, Colonel Bramont, started receiving Armenians in this sub-province, and there were some movables, immovables used by the Muslims, and concrete action was taken, and many Armenians received their properties. This is the first document I found in the library in 1919. Cebel-i Bereket Sanjak, Lieutenant Andrea sends a note to Colonel Bremont. And by the way, the French, the translations from the French was actually done by Ayfer, and I would like to thank him very much. In 1919, this note was sent to Bremont, and this is written by Lieutenant Andre, and he says that Cebel-i Sar, in these Armenians' properties were given back. As such, the Armenian goods list is also provided, and this is sent to Colonel Bremont. And all the properties of the Armenians are given back, and the Misak-Namyan, head of the Armenian Council, and 3 members also provided a signature. In addition, in Dörtyol, women, there are no children and women to be given back to their families. In Hatsa and Baja sub-provinces, restitution is continuing. Islahi, thanks to us, Bogos, certain conflicts are being dealt with in a friendly manner. Ninth of April 1919, Dörtyol Governor Şevki Bey says that everyone was able to go back to their families, and that there was nothing else to be done. And in April 12th, 1919, another note said that in 10th of April 1919, Lieutenant Andrea sent a list, and in addition, another immovables list was presented. This is the start of the list. The list mentioned by Lieutenant Andrea also included this. This comprises 100 families, goods, numbers, who it belonged to, and who it was given to after the deportation. So up until now, I mean, this is the, especially for Cilicia, for the restitution, I mean, so far we haven't seen any other lists or any other documents. So in that sense, I mean, on this list you see who got these goods, their quantities, their descriptions. So basically, in a very clear manner, we see that the liquidation commissions actually did some work, and you see the results of this work.
Liste uzuyor. Listelerin birinde örnek vermek gerekirse
Let's take a look. Ohannes Melkolyan of Osmaniye in 1919, it was given back. On the other hand, Garabet's field was given to Hacı Ökkeş Efendi, and he says that he holds a title deed. Garabet, another barley field, was taken from Hasan Efendi and given to its rightful owner. So as you see, from a conceptual point, we are talking about how some notables, Turkish notables, received the Armenian property, but you see here on paper how it actually happened, and how certain things were auctioned off at very low prices, and most of these people are also members of the CUP. Garabet Sarafoğlu, one of his shops was sold off by Ziraat Bankası. Another one was given back to his mother. Another example, Artin Hacharyan's house in 1918, and 4 shops that belonged to Harkanyan brothers were given back to their rightful owners. In cases when the proprietor did not come back, you also find information. David, Şükrü, son of Davud, and so and so did not come back, and some people's property were not confiscated. So according to this, the decree of 1920, 19th of January, actually legalizes what took place. At the end of the lists, in 1919, another note was annexed, and under this note, Treasurer Bekir Sıtkı Bey also provided signature, and these public servants present this to a higher rank officer, and then this is sent to the Lieutenant Andrea. And in this note, you see confiscated goods and fields and property, and how they had to be taken back for restitution, and it tells that this was done, and this was also added. 18 pieces of property was given back to the Armenian community, and the public servants say that in the sub-province there's nothing that can be given back. After 1918, how many Armenians came back, and what proportion could get their properties back? It's very difficult to estimate this. In 1919, the occupying forces complained that not enough help was done, and the Ministry of Interior said that 232,000 people actually came back, according to news articles, especially in Ati newspaper. People coming back, well, the government, 100,000 Greeks, and about the same amount of Armenians came back, according to government figures. In 1919, Damat Ferit Pasha presents a report to the British Commissary, and he says that 276,000 Armenians actually came back. In 1920, again in the newspapers say that 3,000 Armenians came back since the armistice. And what proportion of these Armenians could actually receive their goods back? We don't know much, because, like I said previously, the records are not accessible. These archives are not open to researchers. In 1922, a detailed law was passed, and some were annulled. 1920 decree was discussed at the parliament, and Fehmi Bey, Interior Minister, said something. 1920 decrees execution is 1/10 of what is stipulated by law, and apparently 90% of the abandoned goods properties had not been given back, and the reason why they wanted to annul this was this exactly. Ankara government did not want to give back anything to the Armenians, and that's why the liquidation laws were reenacted. And like as you know, in 1923, in April, certain liquidation laws and decrees with minor amendments were reenacted, and actually the scope was made more extensive. This is and what I mean by this is between 1919 and 21 there were some fugitives. Some people were labeled as fugitives, and their goods were also liquidated and confiscated. And as like I said, some Armenians received their property, but this does not apply to the Asia Minor geography or to the 1.5 million Armenian population in total. And the Adana province, Osmaniye, Bahçeşehir, and Dörtyol sub-provinces, for these places we cannot say all the properties were given back, and in cases that we know that this was the case, the Ankara government tried to stop the process, and the whole strategy was to not give even a dime back to the Armenians. As you would understand from here, the Armenian genocide is not a series of barbarism against the Armenians, but it actually, I mean, you also find traces of this barbarism in the texts, legal texts of the Ottoman and Republican periods. The policy of making the economy national and getting rid of non-Muslim minorities should be dealt with in greater detail. The abandoned property laws also supported massacres and genocide in many places of Asia Minor, and it also gives us an inkling as to how such notables rose in prominence during this period. Thanks to these opportunities, in 50s and 60s, a rural bourgeoisie came into existence, and these people turned into an urban bourgeoisie in the 70s. Thank you.
Teşekkürler. Sonraki konuşmacımız.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Ellinor Morack from Berlin Friedrich University, and also studied in Boğaziçi University. Her PhD thesis that was concluded in 2013 is Refugees, Local Communities and State and Politics of Dispossessed Property in Smyrna, Izmir. Currently she teaches at Bamberg University, and today she will be presenting a paper on text and subtext in the Turkish National Assembly's Deliberations on the Abondoned Property Law, 1921-22. First of all, I would like to thank Hrant Dink Foundation for this wonderful conference. Thank you so much. This is a very important opportunity for me, this conference, because I have had the opportunity to come together and meet colleagues who work on the same topic as I do. But my presentation will be in English.
I would like to once again go back to a set of sources that has already been written on, especially by Nevzat Onaran, also by Ümit Kurt and Mehmet Polatel and Ümit Ünger. And this is the law on abandoned property of 1922. It's right in between the times that Ümit Kurt has just talked about. I think so far there hasn't really been an explanation for the fact that this law was debated for more than 1.5 years. It was not passed for such a long time and went back and forth from the commissions and was discussed again and again. And it doesn't really fit into this widespread notion that there was a consensus in Turkish nationalist circles about the seizure of Armenian and Greek property. And I think there was no such consensus, at least not regarding the actual legitimacy of this act. And this is why it was in debate for such a long time. This issue of legitimacy, I think, is especially important if we consider that when we compare the Armenian genocide to Nazi Germany and to the Shoah, one important difference is that in Germany there was a time of several years in which, in a piecemeal fashion, one right after the other and one economic thing after the other was taken away from the German Jews. And only after this long period of economic dispossession, there finally was the actual physical destruction of the German Jews and the European Jews as well. And I think this long time period was also a period in which the the dispossession and the pushing out of these people from society was accomplished. So there was no longer such a big question of legitimacy anymore. It was accomplished with economic dispossession. Whereas in the Armenian case, you can see that there is no such distinction. There's murder first, and then there's economic dispossession. And I think this means that we have to think about, we have to assume that economic dispossession and legitimization of the murder actually coincided and were, in many cases, one and the same. I think this is exactly why this debate is important. And I would like to focus, no, I already said that. So the background of this is that the Ankara government had essentially accepted all laws that the Istanbul government issued before the Allied full occupation of Istanbul. So this means that the Kararname of 1920, of January 1920, that Ümit has talked about, was accepted by the Ankara government, at least on paper. So they were theoretically obliged to follow this order, to give back the Armenian property, and of course they didn't want to do that. So what they did was they came up with a draft law, with a bill, which is this Imvali Metroke Kanunu, which stipulated that unlike the Tasfiye Kanunu of 1915, property would not be fully liquidated, as had been done in 1915, but it would be administered by the government. And this was accompanied by a I think I will just start to read now. When the nationalist troops started to take control first of Inner Anatolia and then to regain territory from the Armenian, the French, and the Greek forces in Anatolia, their successes were accompanied by violence against and the expulsion of the surviving non-Muslim population. Their property stayed behind and was usually seized by the local population. In many cases, this local population was comprised of Balkan War refugees who had been settled in non-Muslim houses shortly after the Balkan Wars and during the World War. The first draft of this law was accompanied by a declaration by the Ankara government, which stated that the illegal occupation of abandoned property would be prosecuted, and now aside, that it was quite natural for returning owners to take possession of their property again. As Nevzat Onaran has pointed out already, the bill marks a shift from one euphemism to the other. The wartime phrase, people who have been moved to other places, ahar mahallere nakledilen eşyas, was replaced with those who have fled or have deserted or disappeared, firar ve gaybu bet eden. It does refer to those who involuntarily left places that came under control of the nationalist movement between 1919 and 1922, but importantly, it didn't make a distinction between them and those who had been deported and killed in 1915-16. And it obviously includes survivors who had come back in between. By March 1921, the term liberated territories, this is what the law was for the liberated territories, it included not only the areas around Kars and Ardahan, which had been taken back from the Armenians, but also the French occupation zone, Maraş, Adana, Antep, Mersin. Many speeches in this first debate were concerned with the actual meaning of this new term, firari and mütegaib. The minutes and the subsequent sessions show that the deputies struggled hard to make sense of this new term. Were those referred to as disappeared actually dead? If so, why didn't the state simply seize their property as it had done before? What about heirs? Did the government really plan to give property back to those who managed to return? Could they return? And most importantly, was there a legal and legitimate way to keep them from doing so? The deputies' difficulties partly stemmed from the fact that there was a deep gap between the text of the law and its subtext. In order to understand its objective, one had to interpret it. The deputies did exactly that, and thus allow us to understand how they read the subtext of the law. The first debate on March 14, 1921, it had been in the commissions between this first, the first draft was brought to government to the parliament in September 1920, but it was in the commissions until April 1921, March 1921. This first debate started with a speech by Vehbi Efendi. It's probably Mehmet Vehbi Efendi. There are two Vehbi Efendis from Konya. One is Mehmet Vehbi Efendi, the other is Ömer Vehbi Efendi. Both of them talked in this debate. Both of them are quite prestigious ulema members. And this first one actually later became Minister for Religious Affairs. And he was the one who issued the fatwa that legitimated the abolition of the Sultanate in November 1922. Mehmet Vehbi Efendi stated that those who had, and I cite, quote, migrated from the liberated territories to other countries had all died. He requested to know whether the treasury was planning on selling the property of these dead people or if the owners were actually alive. He insisted that selling their property was illegal either way, both in terms of the Sharia and of positive law. His colleague Musa Kazim, also from Konya, called the law unacceptable because it treated those who had been deported as fugitives and stripped their heirs of their property rights. He probably implied that it was unacceptable to treat people who had been deported and murdered as though they had left on their own account. Throughout the debate, Mehmet Vehbi Efendi was the only one to openly state that most of the people concerned were actually dead. None of his colleagues corrected him in this point. Either they ignored it or the statement was uncontroversial. Hüseyin Avni, who later would be among the founders of the İkinci group, pointed out that property of people who had passed away without leaving heirs automatically passed on to the government and that there was no need for such a law in the first place. Avni was concerned with the rights of living owners and explained that any living owner had the right to exercise his rights through proxies, thus inspiring an important change to the bill. Instead of administration, the next draft now contained a passage that made the government universal custodian for abandoned property. As Taner Akçam has pointed out, the Abandoned Property Bill did not, unlike the wartime Tasfiye Kanunu of 1915, regulate the full-fledged sale or liquidation of abandoned property. According to the text, only movable goods and crops would be sold, while houses and fields would be administered in the owner's names. Only destroyed houses could be sold, again with the revenues to be kept for returning owners. There were several deputies who openly stated that there would be no money in these accounts. The wording of the law, however, suggested that the government was actually planning to give the property in question back. And the idea that was met with incredulity by many speakers. And there was some discussion of this. Interestingly, at first, the government stated that this law was actually not for people who had risen up against Ottoman rule, because those people would be tried in Istiklal Mahkemes anyway. So at first there was an open admission of the fact that this was for people who were actually peaceful people. It took considerable time for the assembly to work out that the government was not trying to safeguard the interests of absent non-Muslims. This was clarified in September 1921 when Minister of Finance Hassan Bey Saka stated that abandoned property was not ownerless, but that it was registered in someone's name. He suggested that it was upon the National Assembly to decide whether the rights of absent owners could simply be transferred from one person to the other. So this actually was, this is objective of the law, which he openly states in this point. He also admitted that his government was already administering the property, even though it did not have a legal basis for this. And this is why he said he needed the law, because he claimed in parliament that local courts were regularly giving back property to Greek and Armenian owners who had named proxies, and through them were able to get the property back, even in Kemalist territory. It would be interesting to know if anyone has had any access to this kind of sources to prove or not prove this. But all this left, again, the question how one could actually legitimate the repeated the administration or seizure of Armenian and Greek property. And the point that many deputies came up with was to say, these people have risen up against us, and therefore they have left zimet status. They are no longer protected people, and therefore they can be killed and their property can be seized. This is a religious argument, obviously. And the interesting point is that those who insisted most on rejecting this kind of argument were ulema, were religious scholars. People such as Ömer Vehbi Efendi and Musa Kazim Efendi opposed this and insisted that it was illegal for the state to annul proxy statements and to take property away from people. Hüseyin Avni, who would later be part of the liberal opposition, also warned that the rule could potentially be applied to Muslims as well. So there was also a conflict between the government and the parliament, or society and state, if you will. He said, if it was the administrations and not the courts who would decide upon this, then all of us would become disappeared, he said, and the property will go to waste. It's also a hint at what had actually happened with this property. So clearly this whole debate was informed by this quest for a watertight solution, for a law that would make absolutely sure that this property would not have to be given back again, as we have already heard. And obviously there was no such rule. You could not find any such rule in positive Ottoman law, which was clearly informed by the protection of property rights. So it didn't take long until this religious argument took over, that these people are no longer protected people and therefore we can take their property. What I find very interesting here is that that even this argument was refuted by religious scholars. There was an Osman Fevzi Effendi, a mufti from Erzincan, who pointed out that even insurgents could return to the state of Zimet, provided that they were ready to accept Muslim rule again. He might have hinted at possible ways to prevent this when he added that the renewed declaration of loyalty needed to be accepted, and that the property, provided that the owners did not return, passed on to the treasury. At the end of the debate, Ömer Vehbi Effendi once again stated that the law contradicted the Sharia. He went so far as to state that a government which passed such a law was an unworthy one. And to this, Mustafa Sabri Effendi, former cadre in Siverek Urfa, so clearly a very much lower post than Ömer Vehbi's Müftülük in Konya, cited the hadith. The blood of a man who has turned arms against his brothers can be shed unrevenged, and his property is fair game, sugar. And then he went, and I think this is very important, he went on to state that the overwhelming majority of the people supported this principle, and that whatever believers consider right is right, Hasan. It is not forbidden, haram değildir. He thus admitted that the question at hand was not government administration or custodian care, but the distribution of property whose owners had either been murdered or would be killed if they dared to return. This statement probably soothed the conscience of many deputies who were very much willing to pass the paragraph, provided that they could believe in its legitimacy. Ömer Vehbi made another movement against it, saying that it did not suit an Islamic government, and it was again turned down. But there were cries of no majority, and there were actually in the final voting on this, there were opposing votes, so it was not passed unequivocally. So to conclude, I think it is very important to see that respected ulema opposed this law and actually voted against it. And they also argued that the text was technically not necessary. This was true, provided that one only read its text, that dead people couldn't return, obviously, and living people enjoyed property rights anyway. But the subtext of the law was that neither the government nor the majority of deputies wanted Armenians or Greeks to return. And the bill actually served this objective. In the quest for legitimacies, it was soon clear that positive law could not be used to legitimate this law. And also juridic fiqh could not be used for this. The solution they eventually came up with was to depict all Armenians and Greeks as a collective of traitors who had consciously left the protected status of the Met and who couldn't return. And the statement that whatever the people think is right effectively acknowledged that it was the will of the people rather than a principle of the law that lay the basis for the dispossession and permanent expulsion of the non-Muslims. So this is actually a step out of the Ottoman framework and a step towards the idea of a public foundation for a state. It's a step towards a nation state. It's absolutely clear that the deputies' perceptions were informed by their experiences in Anatolia. And it is also significant that those deputies who most violently supported the bill were especially Balkan refugees, so people from the Balkans, and also people from Eastern Anatolia, whereas Central Anatolia, and especially Konya, seem to have been places where people still believed that there was such a thing as an Ottoman state and such a thing as positive law, which had to be followed. I think this debate can also be read as a reflection of the ongoing broadening of Kemalist rule in Anatolia. They were not yet sure if they could actually turn this into a permanent victory. So they were careful not to state that they were really seizing property as it had been done in 1915, but they also kind of kept the door open to say, okay, we had a regulation saying that people could return and that people could get back their property. Importantly, the reinstatement, the official refuse of the official way of pushing back the Karanam of 1920, which had stipulated that property would be given back, was they refuted this in September 1922, very shortly after the reconquest of Izmir, when they knew that they had won the war. I think we should do this not only with this debate, but also with other texts, to actually see how this process of appropriation is actually a site of legitimating the violence that has already happened. Thank you very much.
Teşekkürler. Şimdiki konuşmacımız Emre Eldem.
Our next speaker is Emre Eldem, Marmara University, Department of International Relations, graduate course. He focuses on ethnical and religious minorities in early Republican era. Today he is going to talk about the Envali Metruke distribution in Mardin in between 35-36, Ulus Sesi daily ads. Hello. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to Hrant Dink Foundation and everyone who made this conference possible. I thank you all very much. My presentation will be, just like our moderator said, will be about Mardin, and I'm going to focus on a local newspaper in Mardin, Ulus Sesi, Voice of the Nation, and I will present you with some examples from some ads in that newspaper. One of the most important things after 1915 is, of course, the immovables, what happened to the immovables of Armenians and other non-Muslims, and I'm now going to try and give you some clues as to what happened in Mardin. Between 1935-36, there are some ads placed in the newspaper by state institutions so that these some properties could be purchased, sold, or that they could be rented. rented out. I'm talking about title deeds, institutions or other state departments who were in a position to place such ads. And this also gives us an idea about the abandoned properties in Mardin and how they were expropriated, and how whether a new bourgeoisie was created in Mardin by these practices. Like I said, I'm going to focus on the Voice of the Nation newspaper, but before that, let me say that I wanted to present you with an introduction first, and then focus on my work. Just like the previous two speakers said, in a very brief manner, I'm going to make an addition to what they have said, and then I will focus on the ads and share with you my findings. Now, CUP passed certain legislations for the deportations and liquidation of the Armenians' properties, and there are actually two decrees that are especially important. One is 1915, 10th of June directive. It was sent to the abandoned properties commissions first, and that these properties would be managed by these commissions. 26th of September, deported people's properties liquidation and their entrusting into the treasury. And there are so many other pieces of legislation afterwards. And then during the armistice, the Ottoman state was defeated after the war, and the whole picture was reversed. And we see that the properties were given to some of their proprietors, and some war criminals were being tried, or at least there were some attempts to make sure that this was the case. And then the Istanbul government made certain decisions, and in 16th of March 1920 the parliament was closed down, and the Grand National Assembly was set up later on, and the Grand National Assembly also accepted or recognizes this decision. And with the after the triumph after the war, they went back to the decrees of CUP. The CUP and the Turkish Republic, early Turkish Republic, acted in line with the nation-state ideology to create a homogeneous state, ethnically and religiously. The social engineering started with the CUP's government, and contrary to what some people say, actually it continued in early Turkish Republic. So there is no disconnect between the COP practices and the early Turkish Republic's practices, like some people suggest. The Ottoman state and the Turkish Republic that came after it, regarding the returning of Armenians and other non-Muslims, certain precautions actually were taken, like exactly after the exiling of the Armenians, İşkani Aşir and Muhacirin Müdüriyet, and at the time Mardin was in the Diyarbakır province. A telegraph was sent, and it was we see that some empty villages, Armenian villages, were being liquidated, and this is quite clear. This was done to close the path for the Armenians to come back, and many migrants were brought in, and so it was made sure that these new eligible quote-unquote citizens were brought into the region, and the homogeneity of the region was ensured by bringing in Muslims and Turks. And in order for this to be pulled off, completely evacuated villages, towns, and well, migrants or refugees were brought in to be assimilated, and they were given property, and then the process, of course, continued. The places of worship or the villages of these people were plundered, and they were destroyed, actually, also during the first years of the Republic. We see many examples of this. Many churches were actually used as military barracks. The churches were used to store ammunition, or orphanages were used for that purpose as well. And some were just destroyed so that they could not be used again. Also, like I mentioned previously, names of the villages were changed, towns were changed, and this is nothing short of a topographic engineering, and evacuated villages' names were changed, like I said, and many other things in the same vein happened, and this continued actually during the Republic. And according to research conducted, the Syriac, Kurdish, Armenian place names, proper names, were changed by 91% in Mardin, and Mardin is not the only place. I mean, there are so many other places in the vicinity of Mardin, but I think there's a concentration in Mardin because the rate was 91%. The Mardin geography for CUP and the Republic of Turkey was the epicenter of a social engineering project, and non-Muslims were effaced from the face of this geography, and their goods were liquidated, and their goods and properties were distributed, not sold even, to those eligible migrants coming in from other parts of the empire.
Öncelikli olarak konuşmamın başında bahsettiğim üzere öncelikli olarak Ulus Sesi gazetesi.
Like I said, I looked at the Voice of the Nation local newspaper. But first of all, let's take a look at what this new paper is like. This is a local weekly publication, and I focused on the period between 21st of January 1935 to 10th of September 1936, and as much as possible I tried to keep this period short so that I could focus on a clearer profile, and I focused on both renting out as well as selling of these properties. Also, I will pose another question, which is why some of these were postponed. The fact that it was postponed until this time needs to be looked into as well. I mean, we're talking about the mid-30s, and why weren't these properties sold in the 20s, in the uncertainty of the early 20s? Why wait until mid-30s when the state had more or less established itself? I'm going to try and focus on that as well. And I'm also going to tackle whether this is an exception or whether this is prevalent in other parts of the country as well.
Zamanda birkaç ilin gazetelerine göz at.
I've had the opportunity to take a look at other some other publications, and for this period, starting with 34 all the way till 39, I see that in many cities there is a changing of hands of these properties, and you can actually make a sense of that by looking at these ads. Maraş, Malatya, Elazığ, Kilis, and Diyarbakır are some of these cities. In many cities in this period you get similar ads in the local papers, and this is all traceable.
devirlerin dağılımını yani bunları
Now let's take a distribution of these properties and how these properties changed hands. This is the picture that we are faced with. By and large, these properties were actually rented out or leased. And you see here another thing, which is especially the fields, agricultural land. They are quite substantial. Also, let's now take a look at the ads, and I'm going to try and explain it to you by looking at these ads. As you see here, let's take a look at the last line. These are immovables that belong to the treasury, it says. But as you see on top, you see the names of the previous owners quite explicitly. This is quite striking, I believe. How these came into the hands of the treasury, because many of these names, like you see, are non-Muslim names. These are by and large non-Muslim names, and it's quite telling actually in that sense. Similarly, and this is quite interesting, you see the rent amounts. These are actually they wanted to rent them out rather than sell them, and like I showed you previously, these lists continue. Again, leasing out of these agricultural land. Similar examples here. This looks quite striking. The households, I mean, when you look at the other ads, as much as possible, I try to be as selective as possible. And the first ad, although the amount asked is quite small, the price asked is 1,200 lira, which is quite high for that time, and maybe, I mean, it belonged to probably a wealthy non-Muslim family. This is a house, and the asking price is quite high, so I'm guessing that it must have belonged to a non-Muslim family, a wealthy non-Muslim family. This is a case when the heirs could not reach an agreement, and they wanted the property to be auctioned off by the court, and they wanted to receive their share. But what is interesting here is that the heirs or the shareholders, two are non-Muslims, and the aga of the village is also one of the heirs. And Refailekim and Hana, their children are Cemil and Emine, Muslim names. That's also quite interesting. And to make sense of this, I mean, some of the property was confiscated by the locals, some were the state, and in 1915, after the heirs came back, this decision was annulled, suspended, and the heirs actually came back, but despite that, the village aga and the state still claim a hold or claim a right on this land. And how did they do this from a legal point of view is the matter of another discussion entirely. This is yet another. Well, what is striking here is similarly. One of the legal parties is the treasure itself. And you see the price of the house, and you see that the house is of a considerable size, and it also must have belonged to a wealthy family.
Burada ise eski bir eski adı Telermen.
Telermen, now known as Kızıltepe, the lands, we're talking about fields here, somehow they changed hands and they fell into the hands of Musa Kalav. Another striking ad here is on the left, the Derik Court of First Instance. Here it says Hanna Kesperoğlu, the son is in another country, and something is going to be communicated to them. A field is to be sold, and Müslümanoğlu Seyitan is one of the parties, and we don't know how it came to pass. This is yet another thing, another ad. A notable Muslim family, Şatanalılar's acquisition of property, and we saw this in the previous example as well. So we're talking about indebtedness here. That's how some immovables changed hands, because some parties were indebted. This is a similar ad. Finally, something different. Something that needs to be focused on separately. Milli tribe and members of the tribe somehow started using some piece of land, and the old owners were nowhere to be seen, and they just simply confiscated the land. So in short, here are my conclusions. All these tables and all these ads that I have just showed you may look simple, but they, I think, speak volumes, because you see the changing of hands of property and how this came to pass, and how up until now this has not been questioned today and in the past as well. This city, Mardin, was a city where many different ethnicities lived together side by side, and some people after these processes were kicked out, and the population became more and more homogeneous. And there's also one more thing, which is about the discretion about these properties. We talked about the treasury and how the state confiscated certain goods, certain properties, and how these were rented out rather than selling them. And actually the state itself tried even to create a national bourgeoisie. Their support was very limited, and they didn't sell properties, but they just rented them out for 1 year. They leased them for 1 year, and so in line with the nation-state ideology or project, we lost the non-Muslim bourgeoisie. Turkey lost the non-Muslim bourgeoisie, at least in Mardin, to compensate for this. The support was very limited, and a corporatist, Turkey was a corporatist party state at the time, and the state wanted to call all the shots, and they didn't want any dissident. They didn't want a dissident class in the form of bourgeoisie. That's why their support for the bourgeoisie, for the formation of a bourgeoisie, was quite restricted, and this is understandable from their perhaps point of view. However, yet another thing, regardless of everything else, this was used to create a national bourgeoisie, and we should not overlook that. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Teşekkürler. Şimdiki
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Mr. Oktay İnce. He does very interesting things, but he asked me specifically to introduce him only as a documentary movie maker. And he will be talking about land struggle in Sinankoy village, Armenian properties and the Republic's feudalism. Yes, please.
Sunmak istiyorum. 4 dakika sürecek. Daha sonra sunmam.
We have a video of 4 minutes and then I will start my presentation.
Mehmet Said Taşdemir yazıyor. Diyor Mehmet Said Taş.
ريبك السوشيال ريبك
İşte babamdan sonra soy isim bitiyor. Benim kimliğimde Mehmet Said Taşdemir yazıyor. Diyor Mehmet Said Taşdemir, baba ismi Şükrü Taşdemir. Şükrü Taşdemir diyor, Şükrü bini Ali.
4 dakikamız videoya gittiği için ben...
Yes, as we lost 4 minutes on the video, I have to read my presentation even faster. Yes, I will read out a paragraph. I would like to commemorate those who lost their lives in the massacres of Ankara committed on the 10th of October this year. And at that time they were atrocities in Ottoman period. Now they continue their atrocities in the Kurdish region, and taking into consideration the plunder we have been seeing in the last periods, we see that this mindset of genocide is still living in the current Turkey. So maybe I won't have the time to say it at the end of my speech, so let me say it in the beginning. I want to discuss two things here. What has happened in Sinan village of Diyarbakır actually set an example of the land ownership in that region, and against the nationalist Kemalist discourse, we can say that the feudal remnants, the land aga system is not actually a remnant, but it is a product of the Republican period. During the first years of the Republic, we see that the villages lost their lands, and the local civilian and military bureaucracy were converted into land agas, landlords, let's say. And this landlordship system, or the feudal system as it's seen in the case of Sinan village, affected the Muslim Kurdish villages, and after the 1915 genocide, the land remained from Armenian villages were confiscated, and we can see that it is Mustafa Kemal himself who actually allocated this land to the civilians and military bureaucracy. So, the village of Sinan is attached to Diyarbakır Bismil district. 200 households are there. It's a Kurdish village. It has a total land of 39,000 dekars, and there is a family called Sinanlı family. They have a lot of land next to the village, and they have land that is 4 times bigger than the total land of the village. So the Sinanlı family, they own actually 110,000 dekars of land, which is registered. And there is an Ayhan family that came in the beginning of 20th century, and they received the surname of Sinanlı afterwards. But how did this Sinanlı family get this land, own this land? There was a struggle for 6 months after 6 years after 2004, when the agas or the landlords said that they wanted the return of the confiscated property of the great-grandfathers, and they actually came to a settlement. They wanted to share the land, but the villagers were not given the title deeds. They only had the right to use the land, and the villagers still continue to pay rent to the Sinanlı family for the land that they cultivate. We have the July 1956 title deed and land registry document you see on the screen. It's composed of 2 pages. You see page number 2 on the screen. It says that in 1956 in this village, it is the second Abdülkadir landlord, and they actually collect the title deeds from people saying that we will give you the land, and they exterminate all the documents, and they issue a certificate, and there is a list of people to whom the land belonged in the Ottoman period. And on this list you can easily notify the Armenian names, because during those times Muslims and Armenians were living together in the village, and the most of the land was owned by the Armenians. in the document it says, there is a paragraph, you can see it from there. It says that 103 pieces of land parcels have not been identified. Their location hasn't been identified. We can prove that there is no immovable land that belongs to these people or their inheritors. So this is written in 1956 by the Land Registry and Cadastre Office, and this is signed by the expert witnesses who are actually guards of the Sinanlı family. Despite this fact, there were actually Islamicized Armenian families that were survivors of the genocide. So they looked into the faces of these people and they declared that their ancestors were either lost or disappeared or fugitive. So the land that belonged to them was actually transferred to the Sinanlı family. And actually in 2004, the families who resisted against Sinanlı family are actually the grandchildren of those Armenian families and Kurdish families. And all the title deeds and the land registry records were ignored. So the landlords, the aga, ignored even the land that belonged to them, to their ancestors in the Ottoman period, and they annulled all the title deeds that they belonged to their grandparents, because they can't actually provide a proof that the land was actually purchased from the Armenians, because they claimed that they purchased the title deeds from the Armenian families. Again, as we can see from this document, Hacı Reşit Ağa, Abdülkadir Ağa and Süleyman Ağa, they have certain title deeds dating from the Ottoman period, dating from the 1917 and 1918. So it means that they acquired these title deeds, this land, right 2-3 years after the genocide. So they started accumulating all the land after the genocide. So in this process of struggle with the villagers, I was searching for the court records to see if the title deeds were given to somebody. So I came up with a case of the 73rd parcel. I noticed that the landlords, the aga, actually seized all the parcels apart from the 73rd parcel. They couldn't get their hands on it, so we found it from the court records that they were also trying to confiscate that land as well. Let's proceed, please. Parcel number 73 is the only parcel that the Sinanlı family couldn't confiscate since 1960s through a court order. It is very big. It's 239 decars. So the Ottoman title deed, as it seems, belongs to Mirza Bini Osman of Muslim nationality, and it gives the borders from the east Tomas, from north Keza, from south Dono. So it means that the neighboring parcels of these parcel belong to Armenian families. After the genocide, the land that belonged to Armenians didn't have any owners. So people just rushed into the title deed and land registration office, registered the title deeds on their names, started cultivating the land, and they said, see, this is my land because I'm already cultivating it. So this parcel that is neighboring the lands of Tomas, Keza and Dono, for the three parcels starting from 1938, Sinanlı family also applied and tried to register the land on their own name. So Sinanlı family also registered the three parcels that are neighboring this parcel number 73 in 1938. They registered the lands that used to belong to the Armenians on their own name and started paying tax for that. So just like this parcel number 73, the land that belonged to the Kurdish families were also confiscated by the Sinanlı family, and they say that we confiscated this land because nobody was cultivating them, so they were not in a good shape. So physically they actually occupy the land, they start cultivating it, and then the title deeds are transferred to the Sinanlı family. So this parcel number 73, upon a decision in 1938, is registered under the name of Abdülkadir Süleymanoğlu, which is a member of the Sinanlı family. So Sinanlı family, with regards to many parcels for which they claim that they purchased it from Armenians or Muslim families, it was revealed that they actually bought and purchased small pieces of land. So they issued this title deed for this 16 dekar only. So they bought these small pieces of land, they have title deeds, and the remaining 224 dekar is not on the title deed, but they still registered it on their name, even though it doesn't belong to them. So this, on this right hand side you have this big area, and on the left hand side there is this very small area. So the right hand side actually was registered under the name of Thomas, an Armenian person. So they actually consolidated this land, made it a single land, and they paid only for 16 dekars, but the title deed was actually registered for 239 dekars. So parcel number 73 on 13th of June 1956, according to the cadastral drawing, it says that Abdülkadir Ayhan and his partners own the 5 adjacent or neighboring parcels. In the previous example, we saw that the neighboring parcels belong to Thomas, Keza and Dono, but now they registered it as Abdülkadir Ayhan and his partners. This word "and his partners" is important because there were small shares that were bought upon ownership, and they first buy the small pieces of land, they become partner or shareholder, let's say, to the parcel, and then over time they actually register the title deed under their own name. So this drawing is from 1986, same parcel and the neighboring parcel, all of them are seen as lands of Süleyman Sinanlı. One belongs to Hacı Reşit Ağa, which is their grandfather. So the partners are no longer there, because in the previous one it said Abdülkadir Ayhan and his partners. Now we no longer see the partner, we just see Süleyman Sinanlı as the only or sole owner of this huge land. Concerning the case of parcel number 73, the most problematic area is the neighboring Armenian land. We talked about that on the north you had Thomas, on the east you had Keza, and on the south you had Dono parcels, but the cadastral courts actually do not object to these Armenian parcels to being registered on the name of Sinanlı family. So Thomas, according to the documents, it is revealed that he actually did not leave the country during deportation or genocide, but they don't know where he is. Really, says the speaker. Time flies. Okay. Okay, if it's 1 minute, then let me try. The court starts writing notifications to different people. It says that we will try to understand if Thomas is an Armenian disappeared person, and if yes, it should be inquired and information should be sent to our court. And the demographic directorate of the district gives an answer in 2000. It says, in our village there is no such person as Thomas. However, there was a record of Thomas in one of the documents, and he is a Christian person. So apparently now he doesn't live, but at one time he was living, after this title deed was registered under Sinanlı's name, and he was living in another village. So concerning this parcel number 73, while they were inquiring about what happened to Thomas, the court continuously asks questions to the expert witnesses, and the expert witnesses draft reports. And let me read out one of the reports. It says, we haven't seen any land belonging to the Armenians around the village. The Aga bought 100 years ago all the land, and the entirety of the village belongs to the inheritors of the Aga, and starting from the 1920s all the Armenians sold their land and left the village, and they were not actually deported during the Ottoman period. So this is what the expert witness says. This is submitted to the court as evidence. But in 2009 the villages started a struggle, and these villages grasped the position of muhtar. So for the first time ever, someone that the Aga didn't want become a muhtar, the neighbor head of the village. And two things happened. One is that in the video you saw an interview with the grandchildren of Erobin Ohanyan and Arakçe family and another family, Karatay family. So parcel number 73 case, they actually became an intervening party on behalf of these Armenian families to the court case. So we also encourage them. So they have a legal defense now. They hired a lawyer. They said, we are the grandchildren of Thomas, and they are now an intervening party to this court case on parcel number 73. And new expert witness reports, unlike the other ones, sent the following statement to the court. Ohanyan died, and he has his inheritors as Thomas and Minion, and their children died before the civil law was enacted, which means he died before the genocide. And he has Ali as his son. So after Minas, Ali is the inheritor, and Ali, after the law on surnames was enacted, got the surname of Taştepe, and after he died he had his children. And Erobin, Ohan, Thomas haven't been seen by us, but we have heard them from our ancestors, and during the first years of the Republic they were living in the village and they died in the village, and we have personally seen the other children and they are still living in the village as Muslim people. So this is signed by the muhtar and the other expert witnesses and sent to the court. Diyarbakır Second Court of Peace in 2012 says that these people are actually the inheritors of the Armenian family. In summary, the court decision says that Orabini Ohan, that died before the civilian law was enacted, is actually owner of the land, and the names of his inheritors are listed below, it says. And there's a huge list of people belonging to 3 different families that are stated as the inheritors of this land. So both one family is inheritor from the father's side and the other one is inheritor from the mother's side, and this court case is now concluded. Now they have won the right to be inheritors, but now the court case on the land is still ongoing. Most probably they will actually acquire the right, and they believe they will get quite a lot of land as a result of the court case.
Çok teşekkürler. Tabii müthiş hikayeler.
Thank you for these magnificent stories. The final speaker is Nevzat Onaran. And Onaran has 2 published books on the Armenian and Greek goods Turkification during the last period of the Ottoman Empire and the early Turkish Republic. And he also is one of the contributors of the commemorative book on the Armenian genocide for the centenary of the genocide. He is today going to talk about the Turkification of property, restitution and compensation. Thank you. Yes, we are all very tired and I apologize. I know that I'm the last speaker and I will do my best to appeal to your attention, although I'm not very successful. In this regard, let's first of all commemorate all our comrades from Pamaras to Hrant Dink. Now I will start reading my speech. The foundation of the Turkification of the properties was initiated in 1915, but the real character was developed in 1920s. In the 1920s, the abandoned goods and the Greeks were also put in this perspective. The confiscated goods were abandoned, distributed and sold off, and the deeds were renewed afterwards. In the century that has passed since the Armenian genocide, the Turkish nationalism, politics of economy, has always wanted to liquidify the non-Muslim elements from CUP till the AKP. This has been the foundations of the politics of economy, and today we are witnessing the Kurdish issue and the Alevi issue, and this economic politics is the foundation of all these problems. Armenians and others were banned from entering into Turkey, and excluding the system of the Lausanne Treaty, the property problem will now be dealt with within this presentation between 1915 and 1930. So what was done in 1915? The economical politics was established. There are three bases: 1915 CUP decision, 10th of June 1915 ordinance, and the provisional law of 26th of September. And as per Article 7, in 8th of November 1915, a regulation was put into place. And here are the clauses of that. The economic assets will be liquidified by the court. The real person exiled. Their properties will be registered under the treasury. That's article number 2. The properties will be auctioned off, and the debts will be paid off, and the remaining will be put in the treasury, articles 3, 5, 7, and these properties will be distributed free of charge to the to migrants. And as of 1915, Turkification of the property was established in a systematic manner. Exiled persons' remaining property would be called abandoned property. The registered property would be looted or sold or redistributed. The remaining money would be put in the treasury. This entrusted amount after 1928 was made part of the Turkish Republic budget. Abandoned property commissions were set up, but there were 42 abandoned property or liquidification commission property in 42 provinces. There are 2 books where these are registered, and like Ümit said, these are still not accessible, and I'm sorry if I repeat what has been said. I'm not very successful in this, so I ask for your patience. It is wrong to use the term abandoned property, because abandoned property suggests that you don't know the proprietor, but in our history we know who these proprietors are, and restitution and communication compensation is important in this regard. So in short, actually it is the state, the Ottoman state, who confiscated all these goods since 1920s. It is the Republic of Turkey who continued liquidification. And 20s were built on the foundation of 1950s. Without going into details, let's now focus on what happened in 1920s. In the decree of January the 8th, 1920, all the liquidification was based on a particular decree which was annulled, And with a decree dated 8th of January 1920, again another one was annulled. The Minister of Finance, Hasan Fehmi, says that it's a big weakness that this was not annulled on 23rd of April, and Ümit also mentioned this, sorry for the repetition. Up until now, as we looked into this, we see that a door was open to revert back to the old practices. But actually, this is not the case. Actually, it seems as we were fooled. The parliament decision was made in 1922, 14th of September, and
Belgeden anlıyoruz ki
we understand from this document that despite this decree, the liquidification system was still underway. It still continued, and the budget of the ministry, section 93, reveals some interesting findings. This is the budget of 1921, 30,000 Turkish lira, and the budgetary documents reveal that the liquidification committee in 1921 and 22 continued to liquidify these assets. So the CUP liquidification system remained in power. That is to say, the Ankara government actually continued to implement this practice, and we have evidence for this. Ankara, in charge of the Turkish War of Independence, actually actively sustained the liquidification policies of the CUP, and it's very important to understand this because Hasan Fehmi, the Minister of Finance, actually said that the annulment should have been on the 23rd of April and 8th of January 1920. Despite this, the Liquidification Commission was put in a legal framework with a parliamentary decision that was taken on the 14th of September 1922, and thanks to Law 333, and the liquidification law was reorganized, and the 6th article of this is very important. As per this article, the transferred or lost peoples, or those who left, those who fled to other countries, and also those who went to Istanbul and its vicinity, their properties were put in the within the framework of abandoned properties. So this actually paved the way for the state to confiscate all these goods, and new commissions were set up. And just like in 1915, they were entrusted with the job of executing these processes. So when we look at this budgetary documents, we see that in 1922 and 23 these commissions were in place. In 1923, this law was restructured, and until 1988, this piece of legislation remained in power. So let me skip some of these bits, perhaps. Transferring of the goods within abandoned property. So who received those goods? Refugees, migrants, Muslims, bureaucrats, the Turkish hearth, Muslim capital holders, and the families of 12 CUP leaders from Sarasaryan Han to Surpagop Cemetery, Ahtamar, and Çankaya residence. Many of these properties were actually confiscated by the state within this pretext. In short, this possession and transfer is a century-old state policy. Turkish state title deeds were made defunct, and Christians were driven to the rural areas, and then to Istanbul, and then all around the world, and the confiscation continued. After the transfer, you have the process of deeds. Those who receive these properties sort of find a pretext to get deeds for these properties in the registries. Some things were manipulated as well, and in 1929 legislation was passed to actually change some of these records. I know my time is limited, but about the money entrusted to the treasury, there are certain theories. Some of this money was deposited in the Ziraat Bank, and as for the acquisition of deeds for these properties, I would like to share something with you, a circular from the finance department. Local authorities were warned, and it is said that the goods of these people who abandoned the country talks about certain properties that are now within the treasury. Those who fled, and the Greeks' properties should be reverted back to the state. For such people, the properties of these PIDs should be all legal. And no, we apologize because this is in Ottoman, not in Turkish. So in short, due to the liquidification properties, although you need to register it with the registrar, and if you still see the proprietor in the registrar, this does not mean much. This still belongs to the treasury, it says. In 1940, this is what the Ministry of Finance actually explicitly said. So the state, from time to time, wanted to understand how much of the abandoned properties were sold. In 1929, a directive was published to understand this, and I'm going to read 3 articles of this. The first article, Armenian and Greeks immovables. Well, again, this is in Ottoman, and we apologize for the lack of interpreting.
Ermeni ve sair envali metrukesi hakkında 7 numaralı sütunda esami itibariyle izahat lazım verilmelidir. 6. maddesi, Rum enval metrukesinin müfredatlı kapatılmış yekunundan sonra ufki bir çizgi çekilecek ve bunun altında Ermeni vesaire enval metrukesi dahi isim, nevi, adet itibariyle ayrıntılı kaydedilecek ve her bir
A similar work was done in 1932. I'm reading a news clip from Cumhuriyet newspaper. Again, this is a text in which is laden with Ottoman words, and we apologize for the lack of interpreting.
Bu emlak mezkur müdürlükler tarafından idare edilecektir. Enval metruke ile ilgili sıkı kontrole devam.
Controls were carried out for abandoned properties. We have always talked about the importance of records, and in 1937 in Tanin there is something. again, there's a reference. In addition to information regarding the migrants, information is provided as to what they received, the type of the property, and one of the questions underneath, and these are encircled in red, and this is what's written there. It specifies who left or who abandoned the property, and this piece of information actually came from somewhere. In order to Turkify the economy, this has been going on for 100 years, from Armenians, Syriac, other Anatolian people's properties were Turkified, and under the pretext that there's a fight against what is holy and what is sacred, many social tensions were initiated, and it is impossible for us to compensate for all these atrocities, and but the restitution and compensation is possible. This is legal, and this is a political struggle as well, and the records are actually under the thumb of the Turkish state, because this is what the entire state is built on. In short, those who were exiled in 1915s, those who fled in the 20s, were actually registered under the treasury, and the Turkish Republic therefore is the counterparty to this, because it is the continuation of the Ottoman state, and after the liquidification of the economic existence, certain amounts of money were deposited into the treasury or the Ziraat Bank, and this goes to show that there is a relationship between the state and these people. The Turkish state is also responsible for depositing this amount into the budget in 1928. Again, there is direct responsibility here. The Recodification Commission, all their activities are recorded in ledgers, and these ledgers, these books, will reveal all questions related to who received whose property, to documents sent by the Ministry of Justice to a court case in Sivas, Hafik, shows that these documents are still within the ministry, and these ledgers should be made public. For in the title deeds, it should be made possible that people understand about their the information about their descendants. The Ministry of Interior Affairs, Treasury, and Ziraat Bank, all these archives should be made public. And in short, restitution or compensation of these properties, the actual responsible party is the state, and secondly, those who claim those properties are responsible. Justice will prevail only when this system is eliminated. Thank you.
Çok teşekkürler. Şimdi
Thank you very much. Well, we have a delay coming from the previous sessions, so that's how I'm going to time this Q&A session. I don't want to cause any further details. So, Mr. Selim. And then you, and then you. I have a question for Mr. Ümit, to Ellinor Morack and Nevzat Onaran, very, very shortly, as we have limited time. You talked about this very, very interesting thing. I think this is the first time this is revealed, the restitution of property. I read something somewhere, I don't remember where and what it was, but Mustafa Kemal goes to the Adana Chamber of Commerce and delivers a speech in Adana. And he says all the property that you have acquired is helal, which is good for you, and it will never be taken away from you. Am I right? Do I remember this right? Did he say this? And Miss Eleanor, you talked about the discussions between the ulama. It goes all the way back to 1890s. In the 1890s, when we had the Hamidian massacres, we had the Armenians that ran away from Armenians, and they took the nationality of foreigner. And in Baba Ali, in the Sublime Porte, a council is gathered to discuss what will happen to the properties of these people. Will they be transferred to their inheritors? Arif Hikmet Efendi. No, he was the previous one. No. Okay, the chief of religious affairs said that according to Sharia, the right to inheritance is a sacred right. You can't confiscate these people. And the civilian members of the council, non-religious members, said that this is done to punish these people, so we will do this. We will punish the Armenians, they say. Brief question to Mr. Nevzat. All the land registry and title deeds have been digitalized, despite this fact that the military is not allowing their access. There is an urban legend that says so. What do you think about this? Is it true?
Ondan sonra bütün konuşmacılara çevirelim. Evet, buyurun. Sonrası.
Çok kısa bir ilave yapacağım ben. Ben Hatay Vakıfköylüyüm.
One additional remark. I'm from Hatay, Ümitköy, but I'll ask a question to Ümit Kurt. My ancestors went to Egypt in 1915. After the war, they came back to their villages and they resettled to their own land. When in 1938, Hatay was annexed by Turkey. Our land was left there. So currently we are paying rent to live on the land of my grandparents. You talked about Cebel-i Bereket, but for instance, Sivas, Kayseri, or Bandırma, because there were some people who went from Bandırma. Are there any people who returned back to these places, or they came back, they returned back only to the places that were occupied by the French people, for instance? Yes, I'm looking at you as well. I have a question for Mr. Ümit Kurt and Oktay İnce. Ümit Kurt said that there were 1.5 million Armenians in the country, in referring to 1915. However, he said 200,000 of them came back. However, in the previous session, Kaiser said that 1.4 million Armenians were massacred. So I think there is a contradiction here. And Ümit Kurt said that for the establishment of national capital, Armenian property and goods played an important role. However, in the previous session, Hamit Bozaslan said that this constituted only 5% of the national capital. So I think there is also a mismatch over that as well. And Mr. Oktay İnce said that Mustafa Kemal visited each and every village, each and every city, and allocated land to people, distributed land to people. However, Mustafa Kemal didn't even visit 1/3 of the cities. Who and how did they distribute this land in that case? My question is for Mr. Ümit, a small one. In 1918, the armistice of Mudros was signed, and according to this armistice, 5 to 8% of the Armenians, the survivors, would be able to get back to their homes. This is the main article of the armistice. And they came back to Antep, Urfa, to the Adana, to southeastern provinces, At that time, there was a very rapid organization of the Kuvayi Milliye, and nobody was even able to get back to their homes or workplaces. No one was able to get back. This is a published thing. In the official history, we say the Kuvayi Milliye and the army actually got victory over the French, they say. But what is the real truth? Can you please inform us? Yes, one last question.
Bu Ermenilere iade edildi.
Yes, the properties restituted. The money, was it directly transferred, or the second owners, they were also given some money? Professor Selim made a quote, gave a quote. Yes, that's true. What's the date? I think 24 or 25. Atatürk delivered a speech in the Chamber of Commerce, as far as I can remember. Your question and Thomas' question, I can maybe combine them. Well, I talked about certain regulations about the returns after the armistice. Some of the Armenians that came back were resettled in their own homes again, and movables and immovables. For instance, movables, to what extent are they still remaining? Maybe they are already lost, so we can talk about the return or restitution of the immovables. So on paper there are certain regulations, but district by district, province by province, or Sanjak by Sanjak, we have differences. Oya Gözel has a very good study about Kayseri. From the Ottoman archives and Republican archives, you can gather certain documents to see the restitution process in Kayseri. However, on Antep, I haven't found anything. I mainly used Armenian resources and Armenian newspapers mainly, and some of those findings I will be publishing soon, hopefully. However, Çagadamak or Renaissance newspapers published in Istanbul, Armenians are making announcements on those newspapers about their properties. They make some demands and claims, and as far as I can observe in the Armenian archives, there are important complaints. So in contradiction with the relevant regulations, actually the property is not restituted because there is great resistance, and the example of Cebel-i Bereket is a contrary example to this trend. There is the French occupation army that came, and they started the restitution of property process, and the occupying forces, especially for the Cilicia region, Antep, Urfa, Maraş, when the British came in 1918 December, you see from the British archives for Antep, for instance, the first thing they do is to bring back the daughters and women in the Muslim families, and they immediately take care of the restitution of property because Armenians didn't have any place to stay. They didn't have homes. Add to that, the Muslims that were settled there, the Muslim families, refugees or migrants coming from within the country, and these people don't have any place to be settled. We're talking about an environment of chaos. However, in Cebel-i Bereket, I was also surprised to see this. All the property and real estate was restituted. And the process is that in Cebel-i Bereket Sanjak, the local actors, both with the occupation forces and the central instructions, they worked in harmony with them. But I haven't been able to see the same thing in my own study in Antep, concerning Antep. A second thing is that, your point, for instance, against occupational forces, you have the nationalist or Kemalist movement. Under the logistic and financial support given to the Kemalist movement, the process of restitution of property plays an important role. The first person to talk about is Doğan Avcıoğlu himself. Especially the local notables, local elite, supported financially and logistically the Kemalist movement because they had property that they gained at a very cheap price through confiscation, and they were asked to return all this property to the real owners. That's why they started supporting the movement, so that they just gave these properties to the Kemalist movement. And I have to underline the fact that the regulations enacted by the central government sometimes were not put into practice at the local level. And Cebel-i Bereket is maybe an exemption in this point. Okay, let me wrap up. In 1920, just think about it, 8th of January 1920, you have the official decree for the restitution of property, but in Çakadamar daily newspaper, I have seen some of the issues from 1920. Edirne, Adana, Antep, and other provinces made certain complaints that their property was not returned. I think it was not a question, but rather a comment. In 1895-96 period, I read about the massacres during that period, and I guess it was even an older discussion that was existing even before, but in the 1920s, insistently, people wanted this, so it should be right. That was the approach that we saw, that became more stronger. I really believe that this was one of the reasons why they shifted to a republic in a couple of years. You can't draw this in the existing legislative structure of the Ottoman period, so they wanted to use the people as a basis. I think that was the mentality that they had, and the roots of this goes back to the end of the 19th century, I guess, all the way. Okay, very briefly. Yes, your intervention was very important from that point of view, because in the previous presentation, Mehmet Polatel also showed this to us. So Mr. Sinan's intervention was important. We have the citizenship law, and Mr. Sinan talked about Article 6 of that law, and Article 5 and Article 6 is about what you have just said. The 1894 and 1896 massacres. After the massacres, some of the Armenians went outside Ottoman territory and they received citizenship of other countries, and in 1915, according to Article 5 and 6 of the citizenship law, that's how their property was liquidated. Actually, these people thought they were removed of their citizenship. However, that wasn't the case. For instance, an Armenian who took the citizenship of UK, British citizenship, in 1906, and when he heard about this new law, as no authority was notified that that person was actually now a citizen of another country, they were considered as citizens of Ottoman Empire. However, when they made an application, it was revealed that that was not the case, so they were removed of their nationality. Yes, in the video you saw that down with Aga, long live Republic. The villagers were shouting like this. So it's ironic because they still wait in the last 80 years that when Republic is there, the Agas will no longer own the land, but their land will be given to them. So they are surprised. They can't understand why the feudal system is still there. They can't even say feudal, they say feudal in their own language. And it's very surprising, even during the Atatürk period, the land changes ownership on two axes. One is from Kurdish Agas to Turkish Agas, and from non-Muslim to Muslim. For instance, the Sinan Aga is a Turkish Aga. Sinan family is a Turkish family, not a Kurdish one. And there is also a shift from people with less land to people with more land. Atatürk period, Menderes period, and CHP period, this ownership right that says that if you cultivate the land for 20 years, 20 consecutive years, then you shall be deemed as the owner of that land. And this is actually a barbaric practice. If you just can say that you cultivate that land for the last 20 years, and if you can find 4 witnesses, then you just confiscate that land. This is the Republican era we're talking about. The Kemalist discourse, especially with regards to the Kurdish issue, is that they always say if we solve the feudal system problem, then the Kurdish issue will be solved as well. But they are fooling themselves as well. The system is actually brought by the Turkish modernization, not only the Republican era, but also the continuation of Meşrutiyet era. So this is an ongoing process. The ownership of land has changed on a class basis, and I don't know if Atatürk or Mustafa Kemal visited every city or not, but in the Diyarbakır area, he goes up on a hill and there is a notable person. Next to him, he says, from this hill to the other hill, you shall own all this land. 5 villages, 10 villages, I don't know how much it is, but you will be the king of this land. You can register it on your own name on the title deed, and you can own this land. And he has given the power to these people, and they have somehow confiscated the lost properties or abandoned properties of the Armenians. So that paradigm has already collapsed. The paradigm we call as republic and the land reform. This is just a lie, nothing but a lie. With regards to the title deeds, the National Security Council, Mobility and War Planning Department, Soldier Tahir Elmas writes an article on Hürriyet Daily. Okay, not an article, he is corrected, it's an official document. It says that you shouldn't show the land registry documents to anyone who just walks in from the door. And there is also a warning document. In 2011, the government also repeated this. So there are warnings with regards to the most recent title deed registrations or land registry records. You talked about this case. The lawyers can't even get information about the case. They go to the land registry and title deed office, but they can't get anything. This ownership issue, actually, in 1928, there is a law enacted about the title deeds. According to this, the abandoned properties that were distributed, allocated, sold, or confiscated. Atatürk is still living at that time, right? Yes. 1928 law foresees the title deed preparation like this, but on the other hand, we have this ownership issue, and it is sold with the article 638, 639 of the civil law. You have to look into the newspaper archives. I have been working on this. It goes all the way back to 1940s. So Mehmet Teya talks about Aktamar in his memoirs, and Aktamar was actually going to be registered on the name of a certain Aga, Armenian Aga, with this ownership issue, Agit Aga. So they don't want Agit Aga to take it. They want the state to continue to own it. So it doesn't go back to its own original owner anyway. That 5% thing, I don't know how Mr. Hamid said that, but in 1914-15 period, the Ottoman economy and the studies on Ottoman economy of this period, we know how dominant the Christians are. The Turkish Muslims only hold a share of 15 or 20% within the economy. I have only 3 sources that I can find as available. Maybe you will have more documents. Within the current Turkish territory, according to the census, Ottoman census, 20% were Christian Muslims, and their dominance in the economy was up to 80%. But with genocide, with the population exchange with Greece, the percentages just changed. So in 1915s, we see that non-Muslims dominated 80% of the economy, but when in the 1920s, maybe it's just 20%. Thank you very much. I'm very sorry. I would like to apologize from the interpreters as well, because I spoke very fast because of time issues. Okay, I would like to thank you all. If it's okay with you, let's have only 10 minutes for a coffee break, and let's start the next panel at 4:10. Thank you.